Welcome to Instant Deck Techs. The aim of this series is to give you a short, concise guide on how to build a certain deck. It won't cover every card, but we'll go through all the categories and go over the types of cards needed to make the deck work. Any card mentioned will be down in the description below. The commander of this deck is Carth the Lion. It is 2 black-green for a 3/5 legendary creature human warrior. It has, whenever Carth the Lion enters the battlefield, or a planeswalker you control dies, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may reveal a planeswalker card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. It also has planeswalker loyalty abilities you activate cost an additional +1 to activate. This means if a planeswalker's loyalty ability normally would cost +1, Carth's ability makes it cost +2. A cost of 0 would become a +1, and a cost of -6 would become a -5. So, this is going to be a Golgari superfriends deck. We'll be using all manner of planeswalkers and cards that care about them to create a commanding board state. This will all allow us to race our planeswalkers ahead to ultimate them, so that we can then win the game. We'll be running planeswalkers in all sections of the deck, from card draw to ramp, from removal to win conditions, so do look out for them. The fact that with Carth out, when a planeswalker of ours dies, we get to dig 7 deep for a replacement means that we should never be short of a sparky threat. One thing to mention before we jump into the deck tech is that one of the most powerful things about planeswalkers is their utility. So, often with this list, they'll end up covering multiple different categories. For this video, I'll put them in sections that I think they do the best job at, but having overlap is always a nice thing. Before we get onto the planeswalkers proper, we're going to first mention some cards that'll synergize really nicely with them. First up is Peer Imaginative Rascal, Vorinclex Monstrous Raider, the Chain Veil, and the always expensive Doubling Season. These cards really help speed up the upticking on the loyalty of our planeswalkers, so we can ultimate them all the quicker. What's nice about this deck is that Carth naturally helps with this, so if you don't have them, it's not the end of the world, but it's hard to talk about a planeswalker deck without at least mentioning them. Moving on to some cards that are kinder on the wallet, we're going to start with some cards with Proliferate. Proliferate does a great job of adding some loyalty to our planeswalkers. I put my favourite on screen here, as what's nice about these is that they are repeatable. But if you are looking to put this deck together on the more budget side of things, then the one-time Proliferate cards I still think do a very good job, with Smell of Fear and Spread the Sickness being perfectly fine bits of removal, and the utility of Planewide Celebration does make it a solid include as well. Let's move on to our card draw. We're going to start with some cheaper spells that can kick off the card draw nice and early, or later in the game can let us double spell in a turn. These will be just as important as the planeswalkers we'll get onto in a moment. Oath of Nissa is a great bit of card selection that also fixes our mana for our planeswalkers. Reki draws us a card whenever we play a planeswalker or our commander, and then cards like Nice Whisperer and Read the Bones are solid includes to draw us through our deck. And after those, we have the planeswalkers to draw us some cards. Like we mentioned earlier in the video, these all do other things as well, but the draw card function on these will be fantastic at furthering our game plan. In total, you're looking for at least 8 bits of card draw as your base, but more is always more in Commander, especially if the planeswalkers do other cool things as well. Moving over to ramp, we want to start with a base of at least 8 regular bits before we bring in the walkers. The plan is to use standard ramp to help get our walkers out, and then with some of the walkers that make additional mana, they'll push us over the edge into some really explosive turns. First up in this package is rampant growth effects, so things like 3 Visits, Kadama's Reach, and Cultivate. These are always great in a deck with green, and this will be no exception. Having extra lands in play will work nicely with some of the planeswalkers that we'll be getting to in a moment. After those, I'm going to recommend enchantments that add to the amount of mana a land can produce, so things like Wild Growth, Utopia Sprawl, Fertile Ground, and Wolfwillow Haven. I'm a big fan of these in Commander, and as they're enchantments, it does make them harder to remove than regular mana rocks. The reason for picking ramp spells and wild growth effects is due to the planeswalkers that we're able to play. Nissa, who shakes the world, really loves those extra forests. Then Garruk Wildspeaker and Nissa Worldwaker really like untapping lands. This gets especially better if the lands tap for extra mana. I also really like Jiang Yangu Wildcrafter in this deck, as a lot of our planeswalkers do make plenty of tokens that with him out become Birds of Paradises. And with our commander out, he'll never lose loyalty, as the -1 becomes a 0. Now, some people may be wondering why I'm not recommending mana dorks, things like Llanowar Elves and such, and there is definitely an argument for their inclusion, due to the synergy with some cards like Tyvarkel, and there is a possibility to push into an elf tribal subtheme. The reason why I haven't gone that way with this deck is because of our removal package. One of the best things about planeswalkers is that they don't die when we wrath the board. Our walkers will keep making us a board state while our opponents are repeatedly sent back to the Stone Age. People may not like it, but by God it's effective. Black especially has access to a ton of wrath effects, and with all the ramp that we're running, we can run some of the more mana intensive ones that are nicer money-wise. On top of those, we can run some removal that interacts nicely with our walkers. Edict effects normally aren't the best, but when we get the additional token maker with it, it means that Oath of Liliana can have a place in the deck. Same with Settle to Score. Exiling in these colours is very nice, and the loyalty buff could make all the difference when it comes to ultimating a planeswalker nice and early. And then of course there are some planeswalkers that are just generally good at getting rid of things, with things like Vraska Unseen and the huge Garruk Apex Predator. Moving on to some recursion, generally we're looking for things that bring our planeswalkers back from the bin, as they will be targeted quite a bit by our opponents. As Command the Dreadhorde importantly brings back walkers, I think it could be utterly filthy late game, and I'm happy to throw a large portion of life away to bring back a board state. And then Kaya's Ghost form does double duty, as we can also put it onto our commander before we wrath the board, so we get its ETB effect when it comes back in. Let's move over to some win conditions. First up is the unassuming the Elder spell. Being able to cash in some of our walkers so we can ultimate another one will be extremely powerful, not just in its effect, but by the ability to catch your opponents off guard with the timing. They might think they have a couple of turns before a Planeswalker ultimates, but then you do it all nice and quickly with the Elder spell. What's also nice is that when our Planeswalkers die to it, they will trigger Carth, and then there's obviously the best case scenario of taking out our opponent's Planeswalkers. Moving on, while they don't affect the loyalty count of our Planeswalkers, using Rings of Brighthearth and the Lithform engine to double up an ability of a Planeswalker will be really strong. This can range from drawing some extra cards, to killing an extra creature, to doubling up an ultimate. When you do that, you'll start feeling really powerful. And then for some obscene value, we have Kodama of the East Tree. This can allow us to put 2 Planeswalkers in for the price of 1, and also lets us put a land in whenever we make a token with one of our walkers. Moving on to some 1-card Planeswalker win conditions, let's start with Liliana Vess. Giving us effectively 5 tutors with our commander out will be stupid, and then the ultimate, combined with all the board rights that we're running, will be game over for all our opponents as we just steal all their best stuff. After that, we can run Sorin Markov, for those playgroups with unchecked life gain players. Carth making only a -2 to make a player's life total become 10 means it can be done twice if it doesn't take any damage. We mentioned some already, but the Vraska Planeswalkers all have great utility, with ultimates that should lead to game-winning board states. What's nice is that these are also on the cheaper side as well. And then a card I'm really a big fan of, with Garruk Cursed Huntsman. Carth turning its 0 ability into a +1 ability means we can ultimate it the turn after it comes in, and all our creatures and all of our tokens permanently will get +3/+3 and trample. A constant overrun effect that can't be interacted with is insanely good, and we should have no trouble winning the game pretty swiftly after this. And then let's move on to the biggest hitters in a Planeswalker deck, Ugin the Spirit Dragon and Karn Liberated. In this deck, I think Ugin is definitely better, as we can ultimate it the turn after it comes in, whereas Carth doesn't change the math too much with Karn out. However, they're both really strong cards, and our opponents will have such a miserable time dealing with them, they could definitely both have a place in the deck. Okay, rounding off with some utility lands, as we have walkers that care about the number of forests and the number of swamps, why not turn our lands into both with Yavimaya Cradle of Growth and Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth? Even outside of the interactions with Nissa and Liliana, the added fixing will always be very nice. Talking of fixing, Interplanar Beacon will also do a solid job at casting some of the more mana-intensive of our Planeswalkers. And then, because our commander will be dying fairly often with all of our Wraths, Command Beacon brings it back to our hand nice and easily so we can avoid the command attacks. The rest of your mana base will be very dependent on what you have available to you. We've recently released a video with some advice on building a deck with a budget mana base, which might be of help. Until next time, please like, share and subscribe, and let us know down in the comments if there are any commanders you'd like to see a deck tech on. Thank you very much for watching.